Hello and welcome to our Disruptive Thinker series. I'm Christine Chen and I'm a senior consultant at La Piana Consulting, which is a national firm dedicated to helping our clients navigate change so that they can achieve their greatest mission impact. This year, we're celebrating our firm's 25th anniversary by highlighting some of the incredible impact our clients have had on the sector and asking them what they think will be driving change over the next 25 years. So we are excited to welcome Daniel Katz and Camila Flanagan. And so first, Daniel. Daniel is the board chair and former president and CEO of the Rainforest Alliance, an organization he co-founded in 1986 at the age of 24. And Daniel, by way of introduction, can you share a little bit more about your work and how you've worked with La Piana in the past, and if there was anything particularly meaningful that you took away from our work together?
I have been working on environmental issues now for, 4 decades. Obviously, things have really changed quite a lot. We're looking at similar issues as the Rainforest Alliance looked at a long time ago and still today, and that is, how do we keep biodiversity and forests standing? How do we get people to join the sustainability journey? Frankly, how do we make a planet that's going to be healthy and equitable and safe for all people now and into the future? And when I started the Rainforest Alliance 36 years ago, I thought, gosh, at one point we're going to be able to just throw away the keys and be done. We're going to have succeeded. But I realize now that it's a journey. It is a journey, and I'm going to be passing the baton to Camila and her generation, and we're not done. The Rainforest Alliance a number of years ago merged with a group called UTS, a Dutch organization, and we hired David and La Piana associates to handle our merger. They facilitated it. And it was, the Dutch and the US are very different people. There's a lot of cultural differences. And David was able to bridge the divide really, really well and help both sides understand how we can all win. And I like to think that now, many years later, as one organization, we all have one, and the biggest winner will be the planet, as we are a stronger Rainforest Alliance as a consequence of the merger. Hey, so Camila, how about you? How did you get involved, and how long have you been involved in working in conservation?
I have been working in conservation, I would say, is it a cop-out to say my whole life? I feel like I was born, really thinking about the planet and seeing how the movement of climate change has really shaped my entire life. I can remember being young and hearing about what was going on and feeling like I wanted to get involved. I really got myself started in 2015 as an intern in Washington, D.C., working with Latin American politics and conservation, working in a caucus, actually, the International Conservation Caucus, and then have really been in the DC area working with environmental nonprofits ever since. I really find my passion being in agriculture. I have had so many experiences in life. First of all, I'm a huge foodie, so I love to eat. So I know how important it is for us. But then at the same time, I understand how challenging it can be to produce food for the entire global population without putting a strain on our planet. So that's really where I find myself mostly focused on, is how do we continue to give the people that work our land, how do we continue to feed the world while also protecting the planet so that the people that come after us can, live the same quality of life that we live now.
When you hear about the Rainforest Alliance or conservation like 35 years ago, does it sound like that is just like before anything even started? Do you feel like you're at the beginning of the beginning or the beginning of the end?
I always have this inner conflict, but to be completely frank, I do feel like we're kind of at the beginning of the end. If we don't do something now, it's going to be too late. We're talking about 1.52 degrees Celsius, and we're already there. Regardless of what we do, there's very little that we can do to actually stop the amount of greenhouse gases that are already in our atmosphere. But when I hear 35 years ago, I don't know if maybe it's my perspective of working in this field, but I know, I think about the first Paris Agreement. I think about all of these really kind of industry changing events that happened a long time ago and how they've really led to here. So I feel like it's a weird place in time because there's so many people that have come before me that have done the groundwork. I feel the same about being a woman, right? Like so many people before me had to fight to give me the opportunity that I have now. But at the same time, I feel like we're in a very, very dire moment where if we don't act, if we really don't get ourselves together, we might not have the opportunity to have, these groundbreaking developments moving forward. So a little bit of both, right? Kind of like I know what's happened and I hope we can keep it up.
There was a book that had just been published by Dr. Norman Myers called The Primary Source. One of the things that he said, which I stole from him, and I still say to this day, was that he said, we live in the most amazing period of time in history, and that our parents before us didn't know about the crisis taking place. And our children afterwards won't have a chance because it will be too late. So now is the time that we have to really act. Now, I thought back then that was the time, the 80s and the 90s and 2000s. But I realize now that this period of change and disruption, it's not a year, it's a period of time, but we are smack dab in it right now. So it really is, like you were saying, Camila, it's time to change. It's time to make those changes right now. But I actually happen to think that a lot of the positive changes are being made, whereas a few years ago, I was quite despondent. I'm starting to become a little bit more hopeful that that maybe, the numbers are baked in, but maybe things can be not as bad as they could have been had we not done anything. And if we continue to make progress and even speed up that progress, we can avoid some of the worst of the disaster. Do you believe that?
I feel like working in this space, I have to believe it. It's what gets me up in the mornings and it keeps me doing what I do. But, I feel you mentioned the 90s, right? I was born in 1993 and I grew up in this time where we were debating whether or not climate change was real. And I remember that being a hot topic. And I do find so much optimism in that amongst my peers, amongst people in my age, and mostly anyone that I meet on the street, the consensus is something is happening, we need to change. But I do find it to be quite challenging to sit and see at the institutional level, at the political level, that we're still investing in a lot of things that are not in our best interest. And so I have a lot of optimism around the social change, around the individuals, around the movements. We're seeing a lot of protests right now in Germany around their investment in oil and gas. And that makes me feel really hopeful. And then at the same time, I sit back and say to myself, well, there's a reason these protests are happening because we're still doing certain things. So I think it's a mixture of optimism and pragmatism in the sense that we can't afford to all be optimistic because then it might pass right by us. So optimism with a lot of chutzpah behind me is saying, okay, we really need to do something. I can't just sit in the sidelines and let it pass.
We are going to require the individual to speak up, because it is those individuals who collectively make enough noise that push companies to act. And companies, for better or worse, are typically the ones that push governments to act. We definitely will need to get everybody on board. And those who aren't on board need to get off board, right? And we're going to need to push them off.
I think one of the things that I really liked about your statement is you're talking about the individual voice. And in preparation for our conversation, I was really thinking to myself, what is the one thing that defines my generation? One of the things that really sets us apart is that we grew up with a platform always. And now we have all of these different social media platforms that really take us and connect us to the world. And I love seeing how people are leveraging that to make positive change on the planet. And I wanted to ask you, Daniel, how do you feel like the social media, sphere has really changed conservationism?
On the one hand, I think it's fantastic, and that thanks to the internet, I'm not sure about social media, but the internet in general and communications, if you are a community in the rainforest and there is a problem, you can quickly reach and ask for help. And if we are here in the United States and we want to communicate a message, well, we can use social media. We can talk about a company. And when we were getting started at the Rainforest Alliance, we would try and knock on doors of companies and they wouldn't open. But now because consumers have so much power, immediate power, companies have to stop and listen. CEOs are now saying, come in and talk to us. Now, that doesn't mean that they're making the changes that they need to make, but at least there's a door it seems like it's at least ajar. And we, at some point you have to build bridges, and you have got to get to that change. I personally think we need more CEOs who are going to take leadership, right? And we all have to become spokespeople. And social media certainly, and the internet certainly helps on that front a lot.
I feel like maybe we shouldn't go into the details of whether or not social media is good, because of course it has its downfalls, but I do think that it is a strength in allowing us to do collective action. I find that video is such a beautiful medium, especially for conservation, because you can really connect people with the places that are most important, right? These high value conservation areas, the people that are tending to them. But then at the same time, I never know if TikTok's going to get kicked off the Play Store soon. So I actually just don't have it on my phone right now. But no, I mean, we're seeing now the metaverse. I mean, there's so much upcoming technology that it's really an opportunity for us to leverage it for the future.
And do you think imagery really works as a way to promote conservation? One of the things that has always nagged at me, and still does, is that companies all over, and even individuals, they go to beautiful places to highlight their products. And sports teams are named after iconic species. And yet those same teams and those same companies are not doing anything to conserve those species or habitats for the future. And that feels wrong to me. That feels like they're in some ways, I don't know, either not appreciating at best or taking full advantage of, right?
Yeah.
Do you think something needs to change there?
Well, that's actually a really interesting perspective. A few years ago on NPR, I can't remember the photographer's name, but they interviewed the individual who took the photo of the turtle with the straw up their nose, and really, talking about what that did for plastic straws around the world. And one of the interesting things that I heard from the photographer was they said, I before would only take positive pictures and I would only share positive pictures. But I was really surprised to see that the up close look of what's really happening is what got people really thinking about what was going on. And so I do think that there is a psychological effect of constantly seeing these pristine, beautiful places, of seeing these mega fauna, that you think, oh, they're okay. They're totally fine. Oh, I'm seeing a beautiful, Bornean elephant right here. They're totally fine. I don't need to do anything. And so I do agree with you in that if we just continue to use these beautiful natural spaces as ways to sell products, as well as ways to make people feel good about the planet, we're doing ourselves a disfavor, because we're not really connecting people with the challenges that we're facing at the moment. So I know a lot of brands, and, we don't want to be doom and gloom. We want people to stay positive, because we absolutely have to be able to do what we need to do. But every once in a while, seeing an overhead photo of deforestation can be really, really impactful for the individual. So I do agree that imagery is very, very powerful. We just need to do it with more intention and to really show the reality of what people are facing.
What about consumption? Do so we have used at the Rainforest Alliance, we use market-based solutions. We helped invent market-based solutions in some ways by having companies work with producers and making best practices in terms of certain products. And there's some people would say you cannot buy your way out of creating an environmental problem, and there's something to that, right? But if people are going to drink coffee, we want them to drink the most environmentally friendly coffee available. But so from you and your generation, how do you think about using consumption and markets as a tool for conservation, or is it the enemy of conservation?
I don't know if I could, say with confidence, I believe that my generation would agree that consumerism is bad or that consumerism is good. But I do think that the reality of it is that we want people to live a high quality of life around the world, right? We really want to tackle the crisis of poverty, tackle the crisis of hunger, and we can't do that by stopping production of the goods that, bring us that lifestyle. And so it's really important to work with the systems that are already in place, continue to innovate in those systems, and bring the benefits that, a country like the United States has to the whole population of, for example, my home country of Colombia. A lot of times the brunt of conservationism is felt by the people at that local level, the local Brazilians, the local Indonesians, the local Colombians. And we have to also understand that they deserve the right to more. And we can't stop their progress. And by working with the private sector, by having them, have full transparency over their procurements, full transparency over here's where I'm growing, here's my labor standards, then we can work towards a world where everyone is lifting themselves out of poverty, but our planet isn't suffering at the same time. I see all these eco products on Instagram that are just another supply chain that's being created for eco, purchasing that I also think we need to be a little bit wary about. If someone promises that they're fixing the planet, the first thing that you should ask is, are you really? And dig in a little deeper. So I think that is one of the differences in our generations, is that when we buy, we are starting to really ask ourselves, like, how is this being made? Where is this being made? And is the company lying to me? Right? A lot of times I hear people my age talk about greenwashing, which I think is something that maybe 10, 15 years ago wasn't necessarily a common word that was thrown around very often.
I threw it around all the time, longer than 10 or 15 years ago. I used to give a slideshow that would show people's feelings about how much money was invested in a company's marketing department versus their sustainability department, and try and show just how much greenwashing there was going on. And, using the words like natural, in every single way, as there's still quite a lot of greenwashing or use of language that people are taking advantage of. What's our responsibility, do you think, to these producers that have nothing to do with creating the climate crisis, yet are now suffering the brunt of it, right? So is buying that chocolate bar a good thing or a bad thing? Or, should we be demanding more money for producers? I know these are complicated questions and they involve world markets, but I am curious about the generational divide, if there is one, because I feel like we have a responsibility to all these producers. We are interdependent with the people and the products and the forests and the species that live there. And, we are one. And maybe that sounds hokey, but I believe it's true. It's the Gaia hypothesis. We're all connected. Do you think that same thing? Or do you believe that, for each according to whatever they want to do?
I think there's an altruistic answer and the more realistic answer, right? I think the altruism in me wants to say, of course, that these people shouldn't have to bear the brunt of the crisis. There's been multiple studies that show that those with higher incomes have higher carbon footprints, right? And so we're really contributing to this problem and they're having to bear the brunt. So we bear a responsibility to help with that problem that we've created. However, and maybe this is a generational difference, but I feel like my life has been filled with all of these shocks, right? We had the housing crisis, we had coronavirus. I feel like 9/11, every kind of milestone of my life has been really grounded by some cataclysmic once in a lifetime event. A lot of people, I believe, feel like too much pressure has been placed on the individual to make the decision. Whereas now we really need to turn back and say, I want to buy chocolate and I want it to be your responsibility to make sure that that profit of that chocolate is making its way to producers. And I find that to be a very common sentiment amongst my peers, which is like, I'm in, but I don't have the power. So like, as much as I can do, I need you guys to step up and do something, really
right.
change.
Doesn't it make sense that if you buy something, you should already believe and it should already be made in an appropriate way? If we look at all the laws on all the books in every country, the world would behave in an appropriate way, but people don't follow the laws. And somehow maybe so going back to the internet and social media, we can use that better to expose those who are not following the laws or the rules. Making the world smaller is so great in so many ways. We should be able to use it for good.
Go to the grocery store and I try to use the reusable bags as much as possible. But there's also studies that show that these reusable bags take a ton of water. And so I never know, plastic, paper, reusable. I end up with a bag of plastic bags under my counter anyway, that I then take to the grocery store to have them recycle them, because in the United States, you can't process them. Why is it on me to have to return them to the grocery store to be able to recycle them? And I feel like we should apply that, holistically to the planet of why is it on me as the consumer to have to do all of this research, to have to be so highly educated to just do the right thing? Really need to say, like, let's make the products follow the morality and the laws that we have on the books and not put it on the individual.
You mentioned before about all the different things that are going on, it has gone on in your life, this existential crisis. And, I wonder about that as well. I wonder if you feel like you still have a lot of hope, or do you feel like you've become sort of worn down by one thing after another? And gosh, if you think about it, we're living here in the United States and life is pretty good compared to most places around the world. But even here, maybe because of how it was before, it's different, right? We don't have the same kind of calm that we had before. And we certainly won't have the same kind of climate, because the climate is certainly changing. We are in a crisis. Does that make you feel like you want to work harder? Or does it make you feel like I'm going to stick my head in the sand and, go do something else?
With everything that's going on, it does inspire us to kind of take our own destiny into our hands, right? To really say, there's been all of these externalities that we can't control. How can we control the things that we really can? One of the things that, my dad always tells me is, don't forget that people before you also had their challenges, right? Like, we had the Great Wars, or the World War, the Korean War, all of these challenges, obviously, that have also impacted other generations. But I think our challenges have been so global that it's really easy for me to look at, someone my age that's living in Indonesia and find a lot of similarities between the challenges that we have and then the perspectives that we have. And that, I think, impacts a lot of positive sort of momentum on the movement, because we all have our own upbringings, our own experiences, but we have these moments in time that have brought us together, giving us this camaraderie to say, all right, we're not going to let climate win this one. Like, this is the one that we're going to beat, because we actually have the ability to do something about it. So at least from my personal perspective, it's definitely very motivating. Who doesn't love a comeback story?
I'm of a mixed mind about where we are on the planet right now. I've always said that awareness has been ahead of solutions, right? I've over the last 35 years or whatever, I've watched. When we started the Rainforest Alliance, nobody knew anything about deforestation, and there were very few environmental organizations. Really, now there's, in the United States alone, there's well over 25,000. So the times have really changed, and awareness has heightened. People know a lot more what's going on. They don't always get all of the facts. The fact that, Camila, you're talking about you work in the environmental community, and you don't know what to do if you should with a plastic bag or a paper bag, which one's better. If we don't know these answers, if we're not clear on them, how could we expect the general public to know? So I think that is a big problem that we should come back to and talk about. But I do think that we have the technology to solve the climate crisis now. We have the technology and the wherewithal to conserve biodiversity. The question is, do we have the will? And I don't know if we have enough collective will to make the kinds of changes that we need to make. Are we willing to live a little bit lower on the food chain so that other people can live a little bit higher? There's enough food for everybody on the planet. Are we willing to share it? Can we divide the world up in a way that is more equitable for everybody? I personally would like to think that we can, but I don't know if we have the will to do so. A lot has occurred as a consequence of markets. We are being sold a lot of things that we might think that we want. But if we are able to take a step back or two steps back, we can really get a sense of what's going on and what's really important. The question is, how do we take that step back? One day, people who work in the nonprofit sector solving problems are going to have the most enviable jobs, the most desirable of all the work. And those who work in the corporate sector on Wall Street are going to have the crappiest jobs. And they're not going to make as much money. And they're going to be thinking, how can I get in to make the world a better place? How can I be working in this social sector so that my work and my life will have meaning? And that is, I think, in process right now. I get up in the morning and I feel like this is the work that I have to do, but it makes me feel better about being a human being. And that's that same will. The more that people have that sentimentality and the willingness to make change for the better, the faster we're going to all get to a better place.
If my mom calls you, I want you to tell her exactly what you just said about how it's a wonderful career option. So as a fundraiser, I'm always thinking to myself, instead of selling a product, I'm selling an idea and a movement. And that for me is incredibly powerful, and it gets me up and it motivates me to know that the work that I do, while I'm not, out there actually cultivating crops, or it has an impact. And I do think that that is a big generational thing. The parents of people my age grew up in a environment where they really instilled in us, like, go to school and pursue your passions, do what you want. We all have, bachelors of arts, not of science. We're all thinkers with soft skills and less hard skills. And I think that in ourselves has really shifted the way that we look at work and the way that we look at our own value and what it is that we're producing. I don't think we, or at least myself, want to be part of just a machine that's churning out product for product's sake, but rather really doing something that wakes us up in the morning and we say, wow, I'm doing something positive. So I would love a future, as Daniel was envisioning it, of where these jobs that are working, to instill social change are elevated and really looked at in the same way that I look at them, right? With a lot of respect, with a lot of dignity, and a lot of importance.
If I look to the future, if I look actually at the present right now, one of the reasons I have hope is how many people are moving into this field. There are sustainability jobs within, I think, something like 70% of the publicly traded companies.
Daniel, just to add to your hope, I feel like I am a product of those opportunities. I have, in my book of memories, of my core memories I'll remember from my life, are the opportunities where through school, I got to go out on the field and really learn about sustainability. And so, in front of you is actually someone who is a product of that investment, a product of that cultural shift. So I completely agree with you that it is so impactful, and it really does allow for people to understand that this is a career that they could build, that this is actually something that they can dedicate their lives to, that they can support a family with, and yet still do their part in the movement. And that is, I think, something really special. And people are looking for that. And those opportunities give people the vision to see it be possible.
If we're able to work in a way that does no harm, that if we can eat in a way that is lighter on the planet, if we travel and live our lives in a way that is a little bit more responsible, then we're setting a pace for others to follow. And I think collectively we can make a positive change that way. And that's actually, let me just pivot to that and talk about for a second the environmental community. I've looked at the greater environmental community for a long time. And, it's a problem because we're all fighting over these same dollars. And environmental organizations, just like social service organizations, tend to fight among themselves. And that is so wasteful. So going forward, in order to succeed, we are going to have to find better ways to play well together, to cooperate, to share resources. And maybe this is an area where a company like La Piana Associates comes into play. You can develop an expertise in helping movement or helping fields, right? The environmental community work better together. What are the ways that can happen on a larger systemic tone? I think two disruptive things that could change. One is the role of the board member. Board members' job is to focus on the health, financial, health, and the organizational health of one organization, and that is at the expense of the whole movement. Board members should be looking at the whole movement and saying, how does this one organization help fit in to this bigger picture? They can't be so hyper-focused on just their own organization, because they lose the forest for the trees. And then another way is around finances. The way that philanthropy works is still exactly the same way, for the most part, as it did in 1970. And everybody's fighting for money. There needs to be a disruptive shift so that organizations can find better ways to get funds from those who have them and then use them more collectively. And I know that groups sometimes don't want to collaborate. They think they can do a better job on their own, but we're going to have to change that, because 30 organizations doing somewhat similar work with the same back end, they each have their own back end expenses, et cetera, is just not financially viable, nor is it efficient. So there are efficiencies to be gained. So there are a lot of disruptions that Camila needs to shake up.
One of the things that I also wanted to go back to is when you were speaking about these generational divides in conservation, sort of, I think you alluded to a little bit of kind of clashes between, the people that are coming in and those that have been in control for a long time. One of the things that I think is really valuable is opportunities like these, just the time to understand that we both want the same thing, and really creating spaces where we're learning from the top down and from the down up, right? For me, I feel like everyone loves to hear their voice and loves to express their opinion. And the more that organizations can create safe spaces for open conversation without really a goal or, an aim, but really just for understanding, the more that we can bridge that divide, because people like me are hungry to learn from the people that have all of this wisdom. And we want to be able to take that, put it into our perspective and run with it when we get the opportunity to. So I think, clash might be too strong of a word. It might just be, miscommunication, and we all need to open up the doors and just talk more often.
The one thing that hasn't changed for me over all these years, I remember when the Rainforest Alliance received its first $10 donation, $100 donation, $1,000 donation. I love the work that you're doing, small dollar donors, because it's so meaningful to me. Today, it's never stopped. That when I look at our sheet of who made donations, be it $1 or $5 or $10, I feel a personal responsibility that we as an organization need to do great things with that money. And we need to make the donor, whoever's giving that money, because that's their money, really proud of us. And I want to make sure that we do the best possible work so that they can feel like their money is going to really good use. And I hope that never changes. And I hope that every organization feels that. And I'd like to think that they do.
I'm really proud to say that the Rainforest Alliance, we really do. Every time I see that donation, I feel that responsibility. So, it's being passed down on those that are now, involved in the work. Like every time we get sometimes donations for $3, and those to me are the most impactful, because you can really tell that they're doing what they can, and we have a responsibility to make sure that that money is being put to good use.
Is that a wrap?
That's a wrap.
If I had the energy, I've been contemplating whether I create this new organization called the Big Green Tent. And it's for older people who initially working in sustainability, giving them potentially like consulting services or mentoring work, but also teaming them up with younger people in mentoring positions and things like that. Because I really feel like that big green tent needs to be big.
Yeah.
I love that. That is something that I would be just, I don't know, like if I found that that was a possibility, I would jump on board immediately. I think that, as you said, there's so many of us, but the linkages between how do we get to know each other, how do we learn from each other, sometimes that's not very clear. So consider me your first investor. No, I'm just kidding.